emperor has no clothes on. He's buck naked. That child had to speak the truth no matter how it would make the king feel. And we have to do that today. We have to be very conscientious objectors to the madness that is gender ideology.
And most people default into this idea of feminism is this idea that men are contemptible, which is, of course, the idea behind smashing the patriarchy, and women need to be just like them and have the same equality.
The Crusades were a very belated response to many centuries of Muslim conquests, in which 2/3 of the old Christian world had already fallen to Muslim conquest.
And our faith is strong, not because of the fervor of its affection, but because of the object to which it clings, Christ. And there is no stronger faith than a really timid grasping to the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Families sailing on their family vacation on lakes in Minnesota love Issues Etc.
We love Issues Etc.
I am old enough to remember the bicentennial when it was just 200 years. And I remember 1976. And I remember lots of red, white, and blue. Everyone was flying the flag. Things have changed a lot in 50 years. We have come upon the semi-quincentennial, a fancy way of saying 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And I think it's fair to say that as a nation, we are not celebrating as much. I wonder why that is, and maybe we've just forgotten what to celebrate. Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc., coming to you live from the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case Conference at Concordia University, Chicago. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in. Dr. Russell Don, president of Concordia University, Chicago, will join us to talk about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And then Molly Hemingway will be alongside. We'll talk about the judicial legacy of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. She has written a book recently titled Alito, the Justice Who Reshaped the Supreme Court and Restored the Constitution. Dr. Russell Don is president of Concordia University, Chicago, formerly served as director of the pre-law program and as a professor in the Department of History and Political Thought at Concordia University, Irvine, California. He has a law degree and a master's of business administration from the University of Colorado and a PhD in philosophy from Oxford University. Dr. Don, welcome back to Issues Etc.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
I must note at the outset that with your beard grown out, you do bear a striking resemblance, except for the lack of hair on the top, to the man you're replacing, Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch. But thank you very much for stepping into the breach and taking his spot.
Happy to do it. I'm not trying to look like Robert Spencer. I'm actually just trying to display my confessional bona fides.
So before we begin, we've been taking a little heat in the last 10 days or so about some of the guests that we are having or that we were going to have here at the conference. And many university presidents would have folded up like a cheap tent under the pressure and under the complaints and all of the online firepower. But I want to thank you for just standing tall, standing strong, and not disinviting us.
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, disinviting you never crossed my mind, actually, until I got this note. May I?
Yes, okay.
This one, it's a little bit troubling, actually. It says that is your university served well by hosting a conference with speakers who are political, speak hate toward others, or truly offer no serious intellectual content? Thought if I'd known you were doing that, I'd have charged you double. I mean, it's... No,
well, hopefully we can dispel that misimpression.
Indeed.
What do we mean by America's 250th anniversary?
It's a great question. Some people look at it as celebrating the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and technically that's what it is, right? July 4th, 1776. The Declaration of Independence was signed technically actually on July 2nd, but then they did a fairer copy on July 4th. But it isn't just a document. It isn't just the Declaration of Independence. It's the beginning of of independence from Great Britain, an independence that was not won yet on the battlefield. The battlefield started in 1775 and would continue for another 5 years or so after the Declaration. So it's really the beginning of the story, and in my mind, the story really doesn't get going well, or politically well, I guess I would put it that way, until the Constitution comes along. And the Constitution is a great interpretation and finalizing, if you will, of the Declaration of Independence. In a way, to celebrate the Declaration, I'm going to use a holy example for an earthly thing. In a way, if you just celebrate the Declaration of Independence and not the Constitution, it's kind of like celebrating Good Friday without Easter. It's just not finished yet. And so to me, it's 250 from the Declaration, but it's really 250 from the founding that includes the Constitution that would come a few years later.
So you mentioned the war that began. It wasn't initially a revolutionary war. It was a war for the rights of British citizens.
Indeed.
But Battle of Lexington and Concord, a year prior to 1776, the war was raging. And what changed when the Second Continental Congress said, we're not just going to fight for our rights, we want to be an independent country?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll do a little bit of lead up into that. It was a very fraught question of whether independence was the right path. It had been entertained for some time by some more radical of the colonists at that time, in the late 1760s leading into the 1770s. But things started to come together actually when Thomas Paine published Common Sense, which is a tract. It's actually, to my way of thinking, one of the weaker of the tracts published at that time, and looking back at some of the letters, they had much better arguments than Common Sense for independence. But Common Sense captured the imagination of the people at the time and started flipping people from resistance but not independence to actual independence. And so once that mindset was flipped, once the majority mindset was flipped, well, you had representatives from all 13 colonies. And think about this. They left their colony to go to Philadelphia, and they would never see their colony again, because when they went back home, it was a state. And all by their doing there in a hot Philadelphia summer.
How bad was it? If you look at the list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence, it's long.
It is.
And it paints King George III in a very, very bad light. Was it as bad as they were claiming?
That's a good question. And in a lot of ways, that's the million-dollar question to understanding this whole thing as a Christian. If we're going to say we love independence from Great Britain, then we need to understand it needs to have been that bad. And to understand whether it was that bad, we have to understand a long, long context. Actually, at that time, over a 500-year context of the rights of a free man in English. And so the colonists were free, and they had their own legislatures. They didn't have separate crowns, obviously. There was one crown, but they had separate legislatures in each colony. And then things began to change. They lived very freely, frankly. Think about it. They're an ocean away from the mother country, and they have their own legislatures, and they're governing themselves, but under the authority of the crown. And then things begin to change after the French and Indian War. They begin to levy, the British people, or the British crown begins to, Parliament begins to levy taxes on the American colonists. And the colonists have no representation in Parliament. And so comes the cry of no taxation without representation. Well, that is not an invented thing then and there.
They didn't come up with that idea.
That's right. Taxation without consent goes all the way back to Magna Carta, 1215, that's not permitted. And really, Magna Carta came out of a context too. The question of taxation without consent was fought over leading up to 1215. So this is an old English concept. And then as the colonists began to resist, the English began to close their clutches around the colonists. No, you will come to heel. You will come to heel. And the more they tightened their grip, the more the colonies slipped through their fingers. Any Star Wars fans? Anyway, when I used to teach on this, I would tell my students, because they're 18 to 22 years old, I said, imagine the overpossessive boyfriend. You've gone out with your girlfriends, and he didn't like that you did that, and he's just going to tighten his grip and tighten his grip and tighten his grip. The chances that you're going to stay with him become less and less and less over time. Okay, so now, how bad was it? Well, if you're in Boston in 1775, it's pretty darn bad. Boston in 1776, it's pretty darn bad. They've blockaded Boston Harbor. They're immiserating the people there. If you're along the coast there in Connecticut, if I'm remembering correctly, Connecticut and Rhode Island, you've had your towns burned, as it says in the Declaration. So up there in the Northeast, it's pretty bad. It's not as bad in, say, Georgia, etc. But there is a great deal of solidarity, and so really the question is: Are we going to suffer together, or are we just going to let our northern neighbors suffer on their own? But it was quite significant there in the north.
Dr. Russell Don is our guest. We're talking about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, broadcasting from the Issues Etc. Making the Case Conference at Concordia University, Chicago. We'll be right back talking about the Committee of Five and how the Declaration was written.
This is Molly Hemingway, encouraging you to listen to my favorite podcast, Issues, Etc. Every day you get in-depth interviews with host Todd Wilkin asking expert guests substantive, thought-provoking questions on all of the important news and issues of our day. The expert guests are in culture, law, ethics, philosophy, theology, and apologetics. Expert guests, expansive topics, always extolling Christ. Issues, Etc.
For nearly 140 years, the Lutheran Witness has taught the faith, defended it against error, and shown forth the great treasures of the Lutheran Church and biblical doctrine. We're continuing this legacy by publishing issues and articles that help you see the world from a Lutheran perspective and that teach biblical doctrine and show forth the treasures of God's Word. Visit our website to learn more and how to subscribe, witness.lcms.org. The Lutheran Witness, helping you interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective.
Defending the faith, teaching the truth. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Learning Latin can help your student think more clearly, understand English grammar, and prepare to study science and theology. And teaching Latin doesn't have to be intimidating. Memoria Press publishes a Latin curriculum that is easy to use, even if you don't know Latin yourself. Learn more at memoriapress.com. Save $5 when you enter the coupon code LPR26MP. Memoria Press, saving Western civilization one student at a time.
Are you looking for a confirmation gift for the confirmand in your life? Ad Crucium has a huge selection of lovely gifts to suit any budget. See our jewelry or browse our prayer aids with stunning icons, plaques, crucifixes, and certificates. Our personalized ornaments and boxes are other great ideas. And of course, our theologically sound greeting cards complement the gift perfectly. Visit adcrucium.com. That's ADCRUCEM.com.
Welcome back to Issues Etc. on this Friday, June the 12th. We are talking about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence with Dr. Russell Don, president of Concordia University, Chicago. By the way, yesterday is the 250th anniversary of the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, appointing 5 men to write this document. They didn't take very long to write it, in fact. But among them, we have Thomas Jefferson, who we all remember, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams. 2 of those men would go on to be U.S. presidents. But we're not talking about some committee of politicians. We're talking about geniuses and political thinkers of a caliber that we don't have today, period.
We just don't generate that level of thinker anymore, maybe because we feel like we don't have to. I don't know. There may be a lot of reasons for that. But America, the American colonies at that time were the most educated. It was the most educated people group in the world at that time. More educated on average than the mother country. And many of them were lawyers, and they thought deeply and argued vociferously over years about proper government. And so to an extent, it's maybe not surprising that they were able to come up with something relatively quickly. But these are not 3 men who were necessarily prone to agreement on all points. So it makes it all the more impressive.
I mean, especially Adams and Jefferson, they were political opponents most of their lives.
Yes.
So when they bring it to the Continental Congress, is it a fait accompli?
I mean, they were ready for it, yes. Fait accompli might be a stronger term than I would use, but it was not long, obviously, in the time from their drafting it to the time it was approved. They, as I say, they were ready for it. The rest of the Continental Congress.
So what did it mean? What actually changed with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and then, of course, it's sent off to King George, who doesn't respond to it for 3 or 4 months? What actually changes in the relationship between Great Britain and the colonies now become states?
Not a lot. Really, the war continued. It was kind of the beginning of the end in a way for King George. But in terms of the relationship with the colonies, there was not that much good left to be strained.
It's not a governing document. As you pointed out here, that waits for the Constitution. But the Constitution didn't just emerge fully formed out of Zeus's head. That was a lot of work too, wasn't it?
Yes. So similarly, written by political geniuses in a context, really another difficult context, actually. So the war was over, but they were being governed under the Articles of Confederation, which were not. Can I get that term right? Somehow that doesn't seem right.
No, that's right.
Okay. Yeah.
Articles of Confederation.
Articles of Confederation. My mind went to 1860. Anyway, so and the government by that weak central government was not working well. So you had states overrunning some of their citizens, and a very weak federal government incapable of protecting people. Couldn't levy taxes, so the federal government was broke. The Continental Congress was broke. It was not going well. It was chaotic. By their standards, it was chaotic. Maybe by our standards, it wouldn't have been seen as all that chaotic. We have a lot of chaos nowadays. But to them, it was intolerably chaotic. They came together in 1787, a constitutional convention, to amend the Articles of Confederation, not to come up with a new constitution, but to amend. And so they exceeded what they were supposed to do. They were not supposed to draft a new one, but they realized this just can't work. We have to come up with something new. And they did, and if they hadn't, well, counterfactual history is very difficult to do properly, but it was not good government at the time. And so to have the geniuses of the Declaration of Independence just unfulfilled, really, and for that to remain unfulfilled would have been a tragedy, a political tragedy of the first order.
I want to return to some of the basic principles that the Declaration puts into place, and then the Constitution puts into law. The first one being the self-evident truth that all men are created equal. Why is that important for them to state that?
Well, you get different opinions on why it's important for them to state that. Some would say it was really just Jefferson waxing philosophical for the sake of his French cronies. Others would say, no, it's actually fundamentally important because what they're talking about is the rights of Englishmen. All Englishmen are created equal and living under the crown, and so it was specific about Englishmen. Others would say, no, it was actually a philosophical commitment among all of them that truly all human beings are created equal, and that this would have to show through eventually in their form of government. I like to believe the last of those. We don't have enough evidence, in my opinion, to say which of those was the case. But why it ends up important is you're going to see in the Constitution the diffusion of power. The genius of the Constitution is the diffusion of power. And so you wouldn't have the diffusion of power if people were not created equal. You would have those who are above others getting more power. And so really the entire structure, we can look to the Bill of Rights, of course, that's evidence that people are created equal, all of us. But really, it's in the structure of the Constitution itself. The Bill of Rights would mean nothing if we didn't have the diffusion of power in the main body of the Constitution itself.
And the Bill of Rights is born out of this notion in the Declaration that men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. What do they mean by that?
Rights that cannot lawfully be taken away from them, nor can they be lawfully given away.
They have another concept in there, and it's very Jeffersonian the way they talk about the laws of nature and nature's God.
Yes.
Are they making an appeal to heaven there?
Yes. Are they making an appeal to the triune God? Well, I don't think everyone in the room believed in the triune God. This was a very Enlightenment way of referring to God in sort of in a way that is less threatening and maybe a little less in your face than having the Son of God and the Holy Spirit and of course the Father all triune and having God become man. That's a bit much for some of those Enlightenment thinkers. But yes, it's an appeal to heaven in a more generic sense.
What do you think are the most significant parts of the Declaration?
Thank you for that question. I do not think that the most significant parts are the most popular parts. All men are created equal is one of the most popular parts. That's important, but it is, I don't think, the most important. The pursuit of happiness is the next most popular, right? We love the pursuit of happiness. Had Jefferson said it differently, which is what I think is underlying pursuit of happiness, if he had said life, liberty, and the pursuit of the virtuous life, which is really what he and others of his philosophical persuasion meant by happiness, I don't think that one would be as popular today. What do you mean pursuit of a virtuous life? But so pursuit of happiness and all men are created equal, very popular. But I think the most important parts of the Declaration are that we declare ourselves independent from Great Britain. We are no longer under the crown. So without that, it's just another philosophical treatise of which there were countless at that time. And then the next is, to this separation, we pledge to support one another, and we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. What a culture that is, that these men, these are the haves of that time in colonial America, and they are pledging everything. This is not some ruse to make themselves richer. It is really, we're giving it all up for the sake of this cause. Those are the things that impress me as crucial going forward. Without actually being independent and without pledging themselves to that independence, we never make it to the Constitution.
Dr. Russell Don is our guest. We're talking about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, broadcasting live from the Issues Etc. Making the Case conference at Concordia University, Chicago.
the church's music from the 20th century. The 17th century. The 11th century. The 8th century. The 4th century. The best of the church's music from the past 2,000 years. LutheranPublicRadio.org.
This fallen creation is bested by tornado, hurricane, flood, pandemic, and more. LCMS Disaster Response helps our congregations, their pastors, and other church workers to reach out to their members and neighbors with mercy which flows from Christ to altar. We offer quality volunteer training, help for congregational readiness and response, and disaster grant funding. To learn more, visit lcms.org/disaster. That's lcms.org/disaster.
I'm Pastor Todd Rappy. I serve a congregation here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Our Redeemer Lutheran Church, a sister congregation of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. All of the saints here gather around blood, water, and spirit as theologians of the cross every Sunday morning at 10:30. We only welcome sinners. We certainly would welcome you. If you'd like to contact us through our website, you may do so at faylcms.org.
Listen to what you want, when you want. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Issues, Etc. guest Dr. Ben Mays of Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Here's what Martin Luther says about the pastoral office. My pastor is practicing the virtue that increases God's kingdom, fills heaven with saints, plunders hell, robs the devil, wards off death, represses sin, preserves peace and unity, and plants all kinds of virtue in the people. In a word, he is making a new world. He builds not a poor temporary house, but an eternal and beautiful paradise in which God himself is glad to dwell. We are calling good men to step up. Come to Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Learn more about studying for the vocation of pastor at ctsfw.edu or call 1-800-481-2155. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Welcome back. I'm Todd Wilken. We are broadcasting from the Issues, Etc. Making the Case Conference at Concordia University, Chicago. Our guest, Dr. Russell Dawn, is president of Concordia University, Chicago. We're talking about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So let's bridge to the Constitution. You had mentioned the Articles of Confederation. That was really not working at all. They knew it wasn't working. What was the genius of the Constitution? You had mentioned something along the lines of a diffusion of authority or power.
Yes, and I do think that's the genius of it, but not only that it diffused power, but how it diffused power, because it did it in many ways. So we'll hear about federalism, and so federalism is the division of power between the central government and the state government. And that was fundamental and written, that took place mainly through the enumeration of powers. The federal government would only have the enumerated powers. All other powers, as eventually the Bill of Rights would say, are maintained by the states or the people. So enumeration of powers. And we can't even fathom that today. Whatever power the federal government wants, it has practically. So that's one. Another is the separation of powers. So we have three co-equal branches of government, and the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And then the legislative, being the strongest, is divided again into two. One, the Senate, and senators were elected by the state legislatures, at that time. And then the representatives were elected by the people. So there's diffusion upon diffusion upon diffusion. And then, and this is where the real genius comes in, you have the checks and balances. Now we use the term checks and balances for everything. You know, just basically if there are two different opinions, well, we got to have some checks and balances with these two different opinions. And that's not what they meant by that. Specifically, it is the checks and balances system is small incursions upon the purview of one branch of government by another branch of the government. So the judges are appointed by the executive and then have to be approved by the legislative, right? So that's a check and balance. That's a two-time check and balance. And you have the executive can veto legislation, and then you have judicial review over the actions of either the executive or the legislative or both. And so these are all little incursions on the power. And where does that come from? Well, that comes from, I think, a really sound understanding of humanity. And so as much as the Constitution and the Declaration are both Enlightenment documents, they are still influenced by a fundamentally correct understanding of humanity, and that is that we are fallen. So James Madison in Federalist 51 writes, the famous lines, if men were angels, we would need no government. Well, we're not angels. Well, if we were governed by angels, we wouldn't need checks and balances. It's kind of summarizing that. But we're not governed by angels. Because we're governed by sinful, and he didn't use the word sinful, but because we're governed by sinful, ambitious men, then we need to use their selfishness, their sinfulness, their ambition as a way of checking the power of other ambitious men. So it's not just we need to find a way for them to disassociate themselves with their sin nature. No, we're going to use their sin nature against them by having each powerful branch motivated to check the power of the other powerful branches, right? It's frankly, I think, a stroke of genius that without which we probably wouldn't have so much of the good that we have today.
Do we know who came up with that idea? Who conceived? Because it is unprecedented. There are elements in previous kind of sets of laws or civilizations, but it doesn't come together like that until the U.S. Constitution.
Yes. So
was it Madison? Did he?
I believe it was Madison, but I will confess, I think we know. I think I used to know. But I haven't taught this stuff in 8 years, so I don't remember. But Madison is the main drafter, and he wrote Federalist 51, which explains it. So I would say probably Madison.
For context, and this is drawing on conversations that you and I had a long time ago, two things in that genius have been lost for all practical purposes. One is legislative supremacy, and the other one is the growth, the expansion of the executive branch through what we can call government bureaucracy. Unelected bureaucrats who make very impactful decisions that affect all of our lives. Talk about those two things.
Yes. Well, there's a lot to that. So I'm going to start very quickly with the Civil War amendments. So the Civil War has ended, and we amend the Constitution to control the states, to stop the states from abusing their power, which really, many of the problems that you're talking about come from states having abused their power. So holding slaves, holding people of African descent as slaves, and having that as part of how the state operates is an abuse of power. And so from that comes the Civil War, and then the loss of state autonomy. So the Constitution did not control states before those amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Until then, the Constitution only controlled the federal government. It prevented an accumulation of federal power. Now it's going to prevent the accumulation of state power. So that's kind of step one. Then fast forward from the 1860s and 70s to the early 20th century, the progressive era. Not the same progressivism that we have today, but related. And so there had been a lot of again, state overreach in combination with some of the massive corporations at the time, like U.S. Steel, et cetera. And so people were looking to greater federal power to stem some of the abuses going on at the state level. And so we did several things at that time, mainly in the 19-teens. We changed the way senators are elected so that the people would elect senators rather than the legislatures, which were, people viewed them as too controlled by the corporations. And we added, and this is to me just the most devastating blow, we added to the Constitution the permission for the federal government to tax our income. There was no federal income tax before that. And that money is the money that feeds the Leviathan. And then moving on from there, we have really the enormous exertion of power by Franklin D. Roosevelt, both in creating many federal agencies that we have today, many federal agencies that are massive today, but also pressuring the court to approve some of those moves, to interpret the Commerce Clause of the Constitution in a certain way that would allow them greater federal power. And so through the accumulation of these agencies and the feeding of the power of those agencies, the legislature becomes no longer supreme. We don't have legislative supremacy because legislative power happens through all the various agencies out there. Actually, many of those agencies also have judicial power, but we won't go down that road. But yes, so now, why would the legislature allow itself to lose so much power? I don't have a full answer for that. I will say that legislators now often go in people of very ordinary means and come out people of really very grand means, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know how that happens because I know what their salaries are, or at least it's published. So maybe that's part of why. But yes, these agencies now have the greatest power.
Would the framers of the Constitution recognize our constitutional republic today?
No, not at all. And in fact, I think it's questionable whether they would call it a constitutional republic today.
Given their context, how would they characterize it? What would they call it? A plutocracy? A kleptocracy? What would they call it?
Yes. Well, they would probably call it tyranny, first of all. Just a mere shadow of the old republic as they understood that, government of the people and by the people, as Lincoln said. And I don't know, technically from there, would they go with plutocracy? Certainly, there is an enormous amount of power wielded by those who have the greatest means. And that was what they were trying to avoid 250 years ago.
Our mutual friend, attorney Christian Preuss, has observed that in the First Amendment, religious liberty is the emperor of the rights, of the enumerated rights there. What do you think about that?
Oh, I love that term. I didn't know he'd use that.
Well, it was my term, but I was just embellishing his idea.
Okay. I still love it. So I said they would probably view what we have today as a tyranny. One thing that they would, I think, greatly appreciate is the extent to which we still have freedom of religion. And notice I don't say freedom of worship. Don't let anybody tell you that the First Amendment protects freedom of worship. That's the bare minimum of what it protects. It protects far more broadly than that. The free exercise of religion. We do not merely exercise our religion in church. We exercise our religion every moment of every day. And we do that freely under our Constitution. And arguably, and I'm sure Molly Hemingway will go into this in more detail, we do so with greater freedom today than we did 50 years ago or 100 years ago. There's a great deal of religious freedom is crucially important and very well protected at this time. So it's not fully tyrannical.
Dr. Russell Dawn is our guest on this Friday, June the 12th. We're talking about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. More after the break. Voting takes place this Saturday, June 13th through Tuesday, June 16th for President of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. If you're a registered voter for the 2026 LCMS presidential election, please vote to re-elect Issues Etc. regular guest, Pastor Matt Harrison. If you're not a voter, encourage your pastor and your congregation's lay voter to vote for President Harrison. Official ballots have been mailed to all registered voters. Remember to vote June 13th through the 16th.
Looking for high-quality church music settings? Look no further than Concordia Publishing House. We have award-winning settings for handbell, organ, piano, and choral groups, featuring a wide variety of options for the entire church year. Visit cph.org/music to find a great setting today.
Lutheranism in the Public Square. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
At the heart of Lutherans for Life is good news. Good news that brings hope to a culture so focused on death. Lutherans for Life equips Lutherans and their neighbors to be gospel-motivated voices for life. Lutherans for Life believes God gives the gift of life to all people, from the moment of conception until natural death. Learn more about how you and your congregation can help bring hope and healing to all the life issues through a wide variety of resources and caring activities at lutheransforlife.org.
Hearing is taken for granted until you don't have it. It happens at all ages. Unfortunately, some are born deaf. Others lose it gradually. The end is the same: a world of silence. The Ephatha Lutheran Mission Society serves the deaf and hard of hearing domestically and internationally. They're the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted solely to the deaf of all ages. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.
Welcome back. I'm Todd Wilkin. This is Issues, Etc. Dr. Russell Dawn is our guest, president of Concordia University of Chicago. He formerly served as director of the pre-law program and as a professor in the Department of History and Political Thought at Concordia University, Irvine, California. He has a law degree and an MBA from the University of Colorado and a PhD in historical theology from Oxford University. Dr. Dawn, we've only scratched the surface. The last time we had these conversations, I don't know how many parts the thing stretched onto, but it was a dozen or more easy. Should Christians in good conscience celebrate the Declaration of Independence?
I believe that we should, although I would amend it and say we should celebrate the founding of America, because again, we don't celebrate the Declaration without the Constitution, at least not properly. And so why should we celebrate it? Well, good government is a gift from God, and people of faith and people of no faith and everyone in between enjoy and have enjoyed for 250 years levels of peace and prosperity and security that are really unmatched in world history. It has been a phenomenal 250 years. Flawed? Yes. Deeply? Yes. But phenomenal, absolutely. And what a gift to us as Christians that we have freedom to live out our faith. That alone would be reason to celebrate the founding of America. But I believe there's much more. I'm celebrating.
How would you respond to someone on the left who says these documents, the Declaration and the Constitution, were written and framed by white men who were slaveholders, some of them among the most wealthy men at the time, and therefore it's just the product of the Enlightenment, of just kind of that landed gentry, illegitimate in today's diverse world?
So I suppose my first question would be, so what that it was founded by people of that description? I find that to be sloppy ad hominem attacks. It's not actually argumentation. It is meant to take us away from argumentation. Argue with the ideas. Are they good ideas? If they're not good ideas, attack the ideas. If they are good ideas, then don't throw them away just because the people who came up with the ideas don't meet your purity test. I have no time for that argument.
What about someone on the right who says that our country's founding they say that our country's founding is illegitimate because these were not Christian men. Some of them were devout Christians, but many of them were just kind of deists or maybe theists in the most general sense.
Yeah, so that one could be slightly more complicated. If that's the only argument, that they're not truly Christians, therefore We don't like the founding. Well, that's really the same argument as the left putting forward, right? It's still an ad hominem attack. They don't meet the purity test, so we don't like what they produced. Attack the ideas or support the ideas. But the reason I say it could be slightly more complicated is it raises the question of whether the resistance to government authority, to the crown, that started taking place in the early 1760s and culminated in the Declaration and the finishing of that war, is that legitimate? Well, that's an arguable point. I believe that it was, but I could be argued out of that point, which is the whole point of argumentation. So that one could be more complicated depending on what they're actually getting at.
Someone will doubtless say, you seem to be giving the Enlightenment a lot of credit here, and usually when Christians talk about the Enlightenment, it is in a negative sense, because it did undermine many Christian ideas. How do you respond?
Deeply. Well, I thank God for the Scottish wing of the Enlightenment, which actually preserved some Christian understandings of humanity better than the French did. The French were kind of burn it all down. It's all wrong. The Scottish not so much. Again, I'm dealing with the ideas. Did the ideas make sense? Did they work? We can argue over certain pieces, yes, but did they work? I think they worked better than any government that's been put together ever. And so I don't really, I mean, in an eternal sense, absolutely I care that many of them were not Christians who were putting this together. But in terms of whether I celebrate the genius of what they created, I don't really care that they were deists. I'm sad for them that they were deists, deeply.
Finally, if you would make the case why listeners should both financially support Concordia University Chicago and send their kids or their grandkids here.
That's the payoff question. How long do we have? No, I will I will keep it very brief. The first is rigorous academics permeated by Christian truth. Not rooted in Christian truth, not based on Christian truth, permeated by Christian truth. So rigorous academics permeated by Christian truth. 2, the liturgical. In this chapel, we worship. We receive the gifts of God daily. And in many of the days, it's more than once a day. We receive from the Lord here. And we do so according to, this is a Lutheran institution, and we worship according to the Lutheran forms that have been handed down generation after generation since the beginning of Lutheranism. And many of those forms go back many centuries earlier than that. So rigorous academics and the liturgical. Also the confessional. We are unswervingly and unapologetically confessional in our theology, which means we are biblical in our theology. And so that is the formation that our students receive here and in the classroom and throughout the campus. It is confessional theologically. Also, it is missional. So many of the students here are either unchurched or underchurched. So as our students are formed in the Word and formed by the confessions, they also have opportunities to witness to their faith and to reason with unbelievers or people who maybe are believers but are unsure, but in so many cases, people who just hunger for the gospel. And so we give our students the gospel. Those students who aren't believers, they hear it in the classroom. They hear it from their friends. They hear it in the dorm rooms. Every morning is a morning in the mission field here. But that doesn't mean we compromise on our confessional theology. Absolutely, as I said, we are uncompromisingly confessional in our theology. The last point I would make is this. I have a beloved daughter who graduated from a different Concordia. She's still beloved, even though she went to said different Concordia. Knowing what she knows, she said, "Dad, I don't know if any place takes being Lutheran as seriously as Chicago does." So that is why. That is making the case for this place.
Learn more about Concordia University Chicago at cuchicago.edu, Truth, Freedom, Vocation with Christ at the center, Concordia University, Chicago, cuchicago.edu. Dr. Russell Don is president of Concordia University, Chicago, formerly served as director of the pre-law program and as professor in the Department of History and Political Thought at Concordia University, Irvine, California. He has a law degree and an MBA from the University of Colorado and a PhD in historical theology from Oxford University. Dr. Don, thank you very much for being our guest.
My delight.
In hour 2 of Issues Etc., Molly Hemingway of The Federalist joins us. We're going to talk about the judicial legacy of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. They say that the United States is an experiment, the American experiment. Well, I think the experiment, with all of its flaws, is over. It's a success, and we hope that it continues. We'll be right back.
Listen weekday afternoons to Pastor Todd Wilken and guests on Issues Etc. Issues Etc. is a listener-supported program. Your financial support is vital for the continuation and expansion of this worldwide outreach. Our mailing address, Issues Etc., P.O. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. Box 83, Collinsville, Illinois, 62234. You can also donate at our website, issuesetc.org. Issues Etc. is a production of LPR, Lutheran Public Radio.
Here's an easy way for you to help us contend for truth in an age of anti-truth. Subscribe to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Just type Issues Etc. in the YouTube search engine and click subscribe. For Apple and Spotify, type Issues Etc. in the search engine, hit follow, and leave us a 5-star review. Help us inform other podcast listeners by subscribing to the Issues Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
The third commandment teaches us to remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. We do this when we hold God's word sacred and gladly hear and learn it. Jesus invites the weak and heavy laden to rest in Him, our true rest, because His yoke is easy and His burden is light. This weekend, rest in Jesus as you hear His word and receive His gifts. If you are in Southern Illinois, you're invited to join Trinity Lutheran Church in Millstadt to rest in the grace of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Learn more at trinitymillstadt.org.
Sing unto the Lord and praise Him with instruments. You can learn to do just that at the St. Louis Christian Music Center. Learn to play piano, organ, or brass instruments, or take voice lessons from experienced music instructors. For more information, email musiccenter@ourredeemerstl.org. That's musiccenter@ourredeemerstl.org, or check us out on Facebook, the St. Louis Christian Music Center, telling God's salvation through music.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Krause, principal at Metro East Lutheran High School in Edwardsville, Illinois. Metro East Lutheran High School engages young adults in a Christ-centered environment, delivering academic excellence and spiritual growth to develop Christian leaders for tomorrow. We provide a Christ-centered alternative to public high schools. We're currently enrolling students for the 2026-2027 school year. Learn more at melhs.org, melhs.org.